And without further ado, Dick Ober, president of the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, the largest single private provider of charitable grants as well as student aid in the state. I believe assets at this point, $600 million. Is that close? Plus or minus a little bit. Dick has over 30 years of experience in nonprofit management. Prior to serving at the Charitable Foundation, he worked at the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests as well as the Monadnock Conservancy. We are so lucky to have Dick here in the region as a resident, and we're lucky to have him here today as well as our speaker. Please welcome Dick Ober.
Thank you, John, and thank you for everything you've done for nonprofits in your role on the Charitable Foundation Regional Advisory Board. So I am a Monadnock guy. I woke up this morning 15 minutes from here in Dublin. My family has been here since the 1780s. I will always be here. My daughter is a 7th generation resident. And sometimes I think she looks at the mountain my great-great-great-grandfather probably and grandmother looked at that same mountain. And I say that because I believe that volunteering for nonprofits, working for nonprofits, is a community-based, place-based thing. And that's also what the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation is, and it's certainly what Monadnock United Way is. So I'd like to do 3 things today. One, I'd like to give you New Hampshire Charitable Foundation 101, and I promise you this will take about 2 minutes. I want to perhaps dispel some misassumptions about what the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation actually is. 2, I want to share a couple stories about my involvement with nonprofits in the Monadnock region. And then 3, as Cameron asked me, share some thoughts more generally about the role that nonprofits play in New Hampshire. And again, I might, look, this is definitely preaching to the choir, but I might challenge some of our collective assumptions about what nonprofits actually do in our communities. So, New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. I am the 6th president, CEO of the foundation in 52 years, and 5 of us came from the Monadnock region. Now, I don't say that anywhere except for in the Monadnock. And the 6th was kind of close enough, just in the southern end of the Upper Valley. So all 6 leaders of this foundation came from the southwest border of the state. Not for nothing, I actually think there's a certain rhythm to that. I think this region, we talk about regional exceptionalism, and believe me, people in the Lakes region, in the North Country, in the Upper Valley, and the Seacoast believe they are as exceptional as we are in the Monadnock region. But to me, the Monadnock region demonstrates a little bit of everything that is right about community engagement. I'll talk about that in just a minute. So the foundation was founded 52 years ago, and it was founded with a very simple idea. It was founded by New Hampshire people for New Hampshire. That's it. There's 85,000 foundations in America. Most of them are private foundations, like Gates and MacArthur and Rockefeller and Ford. And then there are 800 community foundations. That's what we are. We are a community foundation. There is an enormous difference between a private foundation and a community foundation. First, we're a 501c3, just like the nonprofits that are supported by MUW, and my guess is all of you serve on at least one board or work for a nonprofit. So New Hampshire Charitable Foundation is a 501c3. Second, and this is something that I didn't know, even though I had a relationship for almost 25 years with the foundation before, well, 20 years before going to work there. I had written dozens and dozens of grant applications. I had served on committees. I knew my predecessor very well. He's a dear friend. I had been engaged with the foundation. I had no idea how it worked. I imagine there's a big old pot of money and some people in Concord sitting there with eye shades on saying, you get a grant, you get a grant, you don't get a grant. That's how it worked. That is not how it works. Just like New Hampshire's nonprofit community, your community foundation, which is what the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation is a remarkably diverse institution. So here you go. There's not one fund. There are 1,600 funds at the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. And every year we open 50, 60, 70 new funds. So we're a foundation that both grows through good investment of our assets, but also grows because people do some of their giving through the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. 1,600 funds set up for every imaginable purpose in New Hampshire, and set up entirely by people who live and work and love New Hampshire. So you might sometimes wonder, why is the foundation funding more in the environment, or more in the arts, or more in social services, or not enough in social services? It's because that's what New Hampshire donors who choose to work through the foundation want to do. 1,600 funds, ranging in size from $10,000 to $70 million, and set up for, you imagine, a good public interest in New Hampshire, or a specific nonprofit in New Hampshire. I can almost promise you we have a fund that supports either that purpose or that nonprofit. We have funds that are specific for one nonprofit. Set up a fund at the foundation, make sure this one nonprofit gets a grant every year. Why would someone do that? Small nonprofits, perhaps not. It wouldn't be a great use of their time to have their own endowment. Set up a mini endowment at the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Make that part of a large buying pool. Make sure that that nonprofit gets a payout out of that endowment forever and ever without having to worry about its own investment committee, its own investment policy, and all of that stuff. Funds that are set up solely to help broad purpose nonprofits in the Monadnock region. We've got dozens of those. Who makes the decisions out of those funds? The Monadnock Regional Advisory Board. Your neighbors and peers make those decisions on who gets grants on the competitive grant cycle in the Monadnock region. We have funds that are set up for broad charitable purposes that are left to the discretion of the foundation staff and boards. That's actually a relatively small part of the pie. Most of the funds that we have and out of which we make grants and scholarships were established by and the purposes and where the money goes were established by people just like you all over the state who choose to do some or all their giving through the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. That's how it works. So let me talk a little bit about I worked for the Monadnock Conservancy for 6 or 7 years here. When I was working for the Forest Society, I did a lot of my work in the Monadnock region. My 9-year-old daughter dances in the Grand Monadnock Youth Choir. We as a family are touched by a nonprofit every single day, at least one nonprofit. Every family in the Monadnock region is served by a nonprofit every day, whether they know it or not. If you enjoy the views, there are land trusts preserving those views. If you go to Stonewall Farm, it is a nonprofit. If you go to virtually any art event, as you know, in the Monadnock region, it's a nonprofit behind this. Now, you all know this. If you have someone in your family who requires early learning, who requires visiting nurse, who requires drug and alcohol service, who requires mental health services, the list goes on and on. And this is where I want to transfer into the role of nonprofits in New Hampshire. I still think that people, including a lot of opinion leaders and influencers and policymakers, think that the nonprofit community is this nice thing over here, separate from the economy of New Hampshire. And we subsidize those nice groups who do nice work. That is exactly the wrong way to think of it. Nonprofits are embedded in absolutely everything in the state. More than most states, we are literally dependent because of our commitment to minimal centralized government in Concord. We are literally more dependent on nonprofits than virtually any other state in the country. Entire mental health system in the state, built around, as you know, Monadnock Family Services and how many other? 9 regional mental health agencies, developmentally disabled. The vast majority of our daycares and early learning centers, they said the vast majority of ours. It's absolutely in the fabric of how we think of ourselves and how our communities work. So what does that mean for Monadnock United Way? Here's another myth I want to dispel, the myth that New Hampshire people aren't generous. So New Hampshire actually is 50th in the country in giving if you measure it against per capita income. Okay, hold that idea in your head. That does not mean we're not a generous state, because the other New England states are 49th, 48th, 47th, 46th, and 45th. Liberal Vermont is like 1 or 2 places behind us. Liberal Massachusetts, 1 or 2 places behind us. Why is that? Because this is the least religious region in the country. And New Hampshire is the least religious state in the least religious region in New Hampshire. Doesn't mean people aren't spiritual, doesn't mean we're not engaged with our church, our temples. What it means is, per capita, we give less to religion. And religion is by far the largest recipient of charitable giving in America, just by far. And education comes second, and healthcare and hospitals come third, and everything else follows from there. So it stands to reason. So Mississippi and Utah are the 2 most generous states in the country, if you think of it purely as charitable giving per capita income. So take religious giving out of it, we're 31st. All right? So roughly in the middle. We could do a whole lot better, but roughly in the middle. But here's something that I think matters for Monadnock United Way. In terms of the number of people in New Hampshire who give anything, we're 11th in the country. That's pretty good. So there is I would argue there's a stronger impulse and a stronger recognition that you need to give something if you're a resident of New Hampshire. And Monadnock region measured not necessarily in the number of people, but in the level of civic engagement, we rank better than the rest of the state. So overall engagement in community, New Hampshire is better than the US average, and the Monadnock region is one of the best regions in the state. We volunteer more, we serve on boards more, more of us give something, although not necessarily to the level that is commensurate with our income. So I'm going to close, and I'm happy to field any questions, with some of what I see are the really big challenges facing nonprofits, and then with just a word for all of you. So there is absolutely no question that nonprofits will share a greater, have to shoulder a greater portion of the common burden going forward. There's no question about it. Need is up in this region, need is up in the state, need is up in the country. The income and opportunity gap of Americans is growing. The middle class is declining. The chasm between the richest and the poorest is just widening and widening. Second, there's just not going to be more public money, significantly more public money for a while. Does that mean we let government off the hook? Hell no. We have to insist that at the local, state, and federal level, government shoulders and pays for those things that only government must pay for. But the math suggests that nonprofits will be challenged to do more and more in the coming generation or 2. I think that's actually a good thing. I think that's something we turn into a strength. But we have to think about it as a challenge, and we have to think about how do we tap into the enormous strength that exists in nonprofit communities. Innovation, nimbleness, passion, people rolling up their sleeves and trying to do more. Frankly, government looks in many cases to nonprofits to innovate and figure out how to solve problems. And I think we could do a whole lot better of translating what we know to help shape government policy. We're doing that right now in drug and alcohol abuse, especially among adolescents. When we think about the Monadnock United Way's commitment to early childhood, I think that that is a great place. Now I know that this campaign continues to be about hitting your targets and doing allocations to all of the deserving nonprofits. And I'm also just really inspired by Monadnock United Way's decision to work with the foundation at your leadership and say, if we're gonna really pool our resources and do something better, what might it be? And recognizing that the youngest and the least disadvantaged of us those are the ones who need our attention the most. And I think there is huge potential for the nonprofit community with Monadnock United Way in the lead, with the foundation's support, to show what we mean when we really are going to invest in the youngest and the most disadvantaged among us. So I want to close just with a truly genuine thank you to every one of you. So this network of nonprofits that makes up something like 15% of our 15 to 20% of our gross domestic product in New Hampshire. This is a significant part of our economy. It is woven into everything in our lives. And it is nothing without the power of volunteers. Nothing without people who are going to spend their time, you're going to spend your time, have been spending your time trying to hit the targets from the Monadnock United Way. Volunteering for the boards, working for the nonprofits if you're a professional. That's how it all works. And I think United Way is always in a fantastic position because every time, and I understand the challenges around fewer large employers and workplace giving is getting more challenged, every time someone signs that form and said, here's $20, here's $50, here's $100, they are recognizing and engaging in this community, place-based set of solutions that we call the nonprofit community. So thank you. Thank you for asking me to be here today, and thank you for everything that you do.
We do have a couple minutes for questions, if there's any question that you're burning to ask. Dick? Yes, Barb.
Do all the states have a charitable foundation set up like New Hampshire's?
Actually, no. Of the 800 community foundations in America, this one is actually one of the largest, and we're one of only 4 or 5 that are statewide. The vast majority of community foundations, especially the vast majority of larger ones like us, serve major metropolitan areas. So, and many of them serve just a single county. So just like the nonprofit communities, there's such an overlay, because we are a part of the nonprofit. We're not a funder sitting over here. We are part of the nonprofit community. We have the board of directors. We have 9 boards, actually. Board of directors, 8 regional advisory boards, et cetera. Just like that, community foundations in America range from really tiny, all volunteer run, very small assets, up to much larger professional staffs and larger budgets, just like the nonprofits that we support. Maine has a community of the 8 states have statewide community foundations, 4 of them in New England: Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. But Boston has a community foundation, Worcester has one, Springfield has one, New York, Atlanta, San Francisco, Cleveland. Name a large metropolitan area, there is a community foundation there. 85% of the American population is served by a community foundation. Peter?
I'm curious, you mentioned some statistics about giving, and I'm curious about the graying of our state and our region. I see it as in industry, how our employees are starting to get older. How does that affect the volunteer giving of our state and region? Are we seeing less giving on the younger people, and because the younger people aren't as many as they used to be? How is that affecting our whole demographics?
A couple of things. Let me bump up the rest of New Hampshire. New Hampshire is not currently an old state. New Hampshire's population and proportion of seniors over 65 is at the U.S. average. That tremendous disservice was done a number of years ago. There was a couple of demographers running around the state who weren't actually quite on about the reality. So if you leave with one idea, next time you say, New Hampshire's filled with older people. It is not true. We are at the average of people over 65. But what we have, Peter, is a very high median age. We have the 3rd highest median age in America at 42. So 15 years from now, especially if we aren't able to keep more young people here or attract more young people here, then we will have one of the larger populations of people over 65, because we have one of the highest populations of baby boomers. And you know, that bubble is moving through. And I say that because right now, with a high proportion of baby boomers, high proportion, frankly, people between like 40 and 65, we should be doing better in charitable giving. You should be focusing on raising money right now from the people who have always given more generously, and that is people who are in their prime earning years or nearing or at their first few years of retirement. That's, you know, Jesse James robbed banks because that's where the money was. That's where the money is today. Now, how do we start training the next generation of younger people to give and engage in all of that? They're going to do it through this. That is one thing we absolutely know for certain. I mean, honestly, I could sit here in the next 10 minutes and make more gifts all around the world and probably get a text back and a picture back of the young child I just helped feed in Africa in about a minute. Impact giving. $50 to Village in Africa. There's a beautiful little child in Africa who's going to benefit from a drink of clean water. So the model of nonprofits will be, and charitable giving will be disrupted, just like other economic models get disrupted. But it's not happening yet, and you have to think about where's the big, where's your best market now, and how do you start thinking about how this is going to change everything for the next generation of givers. One more thing, demographics. So we have some demographic challenges. At 42, high median age. And the real question here, for 35 years, and some of you heard me say this, 35 years, this was the third fastest growing state east of the Mississippi. We had no problem attracting people. We were growing at an average of 16,000 new residents net per year. That stopped in 2005. We are not growing anymore. We are not growing anymore. And the most optimistic estimates, instead of growing at like a little over 1% per year, we're going to grow at 1% per decade for the next couple of years. And if we can't figure out a way to create better living conditions for more young people, then we're going to have a real problem 15, 20 years from now when we really are way above the national average in older people. We also, as all of you know, when you look at New Hampshire's socioeconomic profile, it's changing. We now have for 3 years, and it may have flattened out a little bit, we're not sure, but 3 years, roughly 2010 to 2013, this state had the fastest growing rate of childhood poverty in America. I mean, it's stunning. How can we both have the 6th or 7th highest overall income, which we do, and the fastest growing rate of childhood poverty? So I say that because every child must succeed in the future. It's an economic imperative as well as a social and moral imperative. Young people are not going to be moving to New Hampshire the way that young people moved here in the 80s and 90s. We know that. So how do we invest so we take care of the young people who are here? The ones who can afford to leave may leave. We're hoping they're going to come back. The ones who can't afford to leave, we need to create more opportunities for them to become the employees, the civic leaders, the donors of the future. And it starts with the very youngest kids. That's why we're so inspired by the growing focus on early childhood development.
Dovetails very nicely. I had the opportunity, I think Kelly was there, and some of you may have been there, but Healthy Monadnock just recently hosted their summit regarding a livable wage. Not a healthy wage, not a minimum wage, but a livable wage. And I'm wondering, is the foundation looking at that? Is it figuring out a way, or are you already addressing the issue? Because, you know, we learned that people's income directly relates to their health. So as we look at childhood poverty, when mom and dad, or mom or dad, or grandma or grandpa, you know, are maybe working a couple of jobs just to keep food on the table. So I'm just wondering where the foundation is with that whole movement around the economics.
Sure.
You know, keeping our young people here, you know, so that they're earning a decent living, so they don't have to move. So I'm just wondering where the foundation is with that.
Right in the middle of it. When you look at economic uncertainty, is the single largest predictor and the single reason that and that means underemployment in many cases, is probably the single largest driver of growing childhood poverty. We also know that long-term success in the economy for an individual is dependent on the earliest access to healthcare, education, and parental supports. That's what matters. You can predict And there's a lot of great, new, very accessible research in this. You can predict likelihood of a child graduating from high school, the likelihood of a girl avoiding pregnancy before adulthood, the likelihood of incarceration, the likelihood of succumbing to drug and alcohol abuse. You can predict those things with startling accuracy by kindergarten or third grade. Because that's when it starts to show up whether their kids are ready to learn and whether they're getting the access to appropriate health care, screening for problems as early as possible. So we're actually looking at this in both ends of the spectrum, deeply investing in a number of different interventions to increase youth opportunity and lower obstacles, from early childhood to innovation in the K-12 system, to prevention and treatment of alcohol and drug abuse, to creating more pathways from school to work for more New Hampshire kids. Significantly, the biggest gap we worried about right now, there are plenty of jobs out there with livable wages. Plenty of jobs. In fact, we speak to, I've been meeting in the last 6 months with scores and scores of employers, including several of the largest employers in the state. So we've got the jobs, they pay really well. We cannot find young people in New Hampshire with the skills they need to take these jobs. That's the gap we've got to worry about. And Peter, I don't know if you see this, but how do we create more pathways? So more, frankly, starting around middle school, more young people can see there is a pathway here to a job where I can start at $12 or $13 or $14 an hour. It's probably in advanced manufacturing. It might be in high tech. It might be in some of the higher paid professions in healthcare. Those are the three drivers of the New Hampshire economy: advanced manufacturing, high tech, and healthcare. That's what it's going to be, especially for the livable wages. And how do we create more educational pathways so more young people in middle school can say, it's not a binary choice. It's not I graduate from high school and go work at a dead-end job at $9 an hour, or I figure out a way to finance a $60,000 four-year college education. That's kind of been the two choices. And actually, frankly, for many middle-class families, they've ignored the big third choice, which is community college, because it seemed as like you're not good enough for real college, you go to community college. Young people are often graduating from community college in New Hampshire with a much higher likelihood of getting a good paying job in their first 2 years than after 4 years. Now, 4 years over long term is going to lead to much more income earning power. We know that. But way too often, there's not enough of those pathways. So the answer to your question, the jobs are there, the young people are there, how do we match them up better? That's where we're really spending a lot of time right now.